Hello, and welcome back to our series of Lent readings for 2023, considering people who encountered Jesus. It's day 20, the halfway point through our readings, and today we're going to look at some people who were less than pleased when they encountered Jesus. It's the religious leaders. Not everyone was pleased with Jesus' ministry, particularly those in authority like the religious leaders. They didn't like what he said, they didn't like what he did, they didn't like those he associated with. Partly this was because of the popularity he was generated, particularly as there were some stirrings in the crowd, with some claiming that maybe Jesus could be the Messiah. And Jesus didn't seem to make any effort to correct them. We frequently meet the religious leaders in the Gospels testing Jesus with questions, and that is where we're going to meet them today in a passage from Matthew chapter 22. Hearing that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, the Pharisees got together. One of them, an expert in the law, tested him with a question. "Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law?" Jesus replied, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it, love your neighbour as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments." The two main groups we meet who made up the religious leaders are the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Both grew up in the time between the Old and New Testament and became influential in the Sanhedrin, the Jewish ruling council. The Sadducees tended to be from the aristocratic classes and held most of the powerful positions in the Sanhedrin. They only accepted the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, as scriptures. That's Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers and Deuteronomy. They didn't believe anything that was not recorded in them, such as the resurrection or any idea of an afterlife. They believed that true worship of God only revolved around the temple ceremonies and sacrifice. When the passage we read began by stating that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, it was over a question they had been trying to test him with in regards to the resurrection. The Pharisees, in contrast, were often from the educated middle class. They were in the minority in the Sanhedrin, but they were very influential due to their popularity amongst the people. They accepted the whole Old Testament, including books like Daniel that talk about resurrection. They believed that true worship revolved around keeping the law of Moses, hence the question that they asked in this reading. The problem for both these groups was that they had a very narrow view in their minds of what a godly person was like and how they should honour God. And Jesus didn't fit the picture that either of them held. So in their minds, Jesus just couldn't be from God. He just didn't meet the expectations. Consequently, they dismissed him and saw him as a dangerous troublemaker. Churches today come in a great variety of styles and expressions, and they won't all be like the one we attend. Some will be much more traditional, others way more contemporary. Some will build worship around the focus of the Eucharist, others will build the service around the sermon. Others may appear to put a bigger emphasis on music. Music itself can vary from an organ or piano to electric guitar, bass and drums to unaccompanied voices. We will all have our preferences and probably some questions too about some other churches and their practices. When we hear that God is blessing the ministry of a church who are very different from what we're used to, don't immediately write it off because it doesn't fit our idea of what church should look like, or because they hold some different theological positions that we might disagree with. We may be right, but sometimes God, in his grace, moves amongst people and in ways that catches us by surprise. Take warning from the mistake of the narrow view of God that led the Pharisees and the Sadducees to reject Jesus. You wouldn't want to find that you've missed out on what God is doing next. Until next time, have a blessed day.